So here we have another Pokemon theory, and it's say Blastoise and Blastyke, like the originals, were not related to Squirtle, but like where would they be found at in the game's coding? Really, I think probably the easiest way would be like if you were fishing somewhere in like the Seafoam Islands, and then maybe you'd have to evolve Blastoise. It makes sense, because Blastoise is in this case, Blastoise was a ground and a water type, believe it or not. So that's actually kind of interesting, as opposed to it just being a water type. And I can see why they made Swampert a water and a ground type, because it was an unused concept in Gen 1, and then Gen 2, and then Gen 3. But so, anyways, if we think about it a little bit further, so if Blastyke is originally what evolved into Blastoise, it would require a level upgrade. So there's no Water Stone needed, but it would require to evolve into Blastoise at a level. I'm trying to remember what level it was. I think it was like level 25-ish, somewhere around there. And then you get Blastoise. It's also worth noting, I found out that Dragonite actually evolved earlier on. It was like, according to the Pokemon trading card game levels that they put on the little Pokemon cards, Dragonite's on level 45. I wonder if that's what they realized and then they upped it to 55. Because, Dragonite's a dragon, so it's got to be a legendary or pseudo legendary. Fake legendary. But if it was originally a legendary at one point, like a full-blown legendary, well, then we can actually imagine its speed and its attack were probably originally higher too, but compared to where it's at now. But the same goes for like Arcanine and all these other legendaries that weren't legendaries at one point. Well, they aren't in the final games, but they would have been at some point. Still strong Pokemon though. But anyways, if we also were to think about certain Pokemon, like what else we got? Like again, certain Pokemon that you'd have to find them in certain areas, and then wonder what the odds of are. Like again, the one that I thought was interesting was like Cryothan, Skimper, Beluga, and then Cryothan. Cryothan was probably more of a broken dragon Pokemon than that of Dragonite. Like the Cryothan should have been a legendary Pokemon if it wasn't, because it was a special attack using dragon. It was a water and a dragon type. That's actually very interesting. Once you get Skimper, the game really becomes broken. Like you can teach it water gun. You can teach it like all sorts. You can teach it like the strongest ice and water type moves. And I do believe when I say it's better off being a dragon type, but than it is an ice type. But it's interesting how they changed that, because Skimper once again was moved to the beta Pokemon of the water starters in Gen 2, but then later on it was moved to Sobble. And I wish they would have kind of kept the whole evolutionary line. I do like the final evolution being like a James Bond parody, but I do think it would have been interesting if, they would have kept it as a water dragon, and then imagine having a water dragon starter. That actually would have been interesting. And then later on, you'd find out that that Pokemon was like a giant Indonesian lizard. What is it? A kimono dragon, I believe. Yeah, that's actually very interesting. And if you don't believe me, once again, if you don't believe me and you've never seen a kimono dragon in real life, go type it in on YouTube and really pay attention to like their hunting tactics and like just how strong this thing is. Like it's scary. It really is. And they exist. They still are alive. It's very interesting how I don't even know what kind of a Pokemon is even close to if that Pokemon doesn't really exist in Pokemon itself. What's the closest thing out of all the official Pokemon? Because I'm drawing a blank. That is the closest to a kimono dragon. The only thing I can really think of is maybe Heatran, but Heatran's kind of a different Pokemon. Heatran looks like a giant. It looks like an intimidating alligator or crocodile. But anyways, maybe I'm wrong. So, yeah. So it depends on how you want to look at it. But really, the way I look at it, you probably would, much like Lapras, if Lapras was never really originally given to you, where would you have caught Lapras at? Seafoam Islands? Makes sense. Because even in Gen 2's prototype, there was this Rainbow Island you could go to, and outside the perimeter, you could surf around it, and you'd find Laprases. So that's where Lapras was at. Southern Island, let me rephrase that. So it would make sense. Where do turtles hang out? In the water somewhere, right? And it's kind of funny because like even in Pokemon Snap, if you remember the water level, Squirtle was found in the turtles. The turtles were found in the going down the river and all that. So that the canyon level, I believe, that makes sense. That would definitely explain why Squirtle was, you know, in the water. I mean, hence it being a water type, obviously, but it's, that's probably where you would have found Squirtle if you could catch Squirtle more than once. If it wasn't just given you at the beginning of the games, where would you catch all these other Pokemon that we don't even know about? I think it just makes sense depending on their habitat, either that or the Safari Zone, rather. Something to think about, really. But again, I don't know if its stats would have still been the same. It's kind of debatable. This is without EV stats, effort values, and DVs involved. Keep in mind in Gen 1 and 2, DVs go up to 15 instead of your typical, 31s. And you can max them all out. So that was pretty cool, too. So it's interesting to think about, really.